all you guys out there listening, just before we start, just a kind of like a little warning for you all. We're talking heavily about the film Redline today. It's an anime film. We'll talk about it a bit more in a second, but we highly recommend that you guys watch it before you start watching this podcast because honestly, it's a really good film, and a lot of the references that we're discussing are kind of subtle. And if you haven't watched it, you won't be able to get a true appreciation for what we're talking about. So, highly recommend that you guys watch. Please enjoy the podcast. See you around next time.
Oh, for the listeners, it may seem like we're going on a tangent of a movie that no one really understands what it is, but it's basically an anime film about racing.
Yeah,
And
and
yeah,
it's not just any racing; it's racing in outer space. Like
yeah,
we're talking Star Wars, the pod racing scene, except like 50 times better, like a million times better.
yeah. Well, of like Infinite, because the pod racing scene was never good.
Oh, okay. Actually, fight me. I really like the pod racing scene, dude.
Mark this down. If you're listening, Josiah has bad opinions. He liked the prequels. That's problematic.
Okay, feels
Anyways,
bad.
so Redline is racing in space. Basically, the premise is that a guy named Sweet JP wants to race and he wants to win the red line. The red line being the biggest race all over the galaxy, right? And in
Mm.
order to qualify for the red line, you have to win the yellow line, which is the race before it. Think of it as levels. So there's level 1, which is green line, then there's level 2, which is yellow line, and then there's level 3, which is red line.
Well, when was the first time you saw that? Because I was never introduced to it, and then you guys like were telling me again and again to watch Redline,
Okay,
and then
so
I finally did it.
the way I was introduced to it was I was watching a video by Critical, and then he was talking about Spider-Verse and about how it's really well animated. Then he pointed to a
Right.
poster in the back. He's like, "Oh, it's like approaching Redline level." And then I'm just like, "Oh, what's Redline?" So in the video, he talks about how it's the best animated movie ever. So I searched up a trailer, and I'm like, "Holy shit, that's pretty cool." So I bought it and I watched, and it was pretty wicked. Although technically, the first time I heard it was a couple years back when a friend of ours, Emmy, was talking about it, and we just dismissed it so we could rag on Sword Art Online some more. But yeah. So that's the first time I heard it 2 years ago.
Anyways, it's an absolute masterpiece in what Will said, which is the art of show don't tell, but also in just the pure exhilaration of watching a film. Like
Yeah.
I have not gotten that pumped for a scene in a very long time. Like I
Like
can't
you also
remember the last time.
like there's stuff like you wonder like, oh, it's just an anime. How can it be like? And I feel like it's now is a good time to say that this movie took approximately a decade to make and it came out in 2009, right? It took
It
approximately
says
a decade to make.
it says here that it started in they
2002.
they they, re- they released an OVA in 2003, so production probably started in around 2002, and it was released in 2009. So that is
Yeah, so
roughly 7 years.
I say decade like loosely. That's just what the community says, right? They just like
Right.
to say decade because it just sounds more fantastical. I say it because I'd rather say decade than 7 years. I don't know. I gotta stick up my ass. But so and everything is animated by hand. Every
There are
scene.
over 100. There are over 100,000 frames of production, hand animated.
Yeah, like in terms of animation quality, this is literally a contender with Akira. But the problem is, the difference is that Akira for its time was astounding. In
Right.
modern day, in today's like day and age, especially in 2009, that level of animation, it's more believable, right?
Yeah.
That's besides the point. This is god tier stuff, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. It's difficult to explain fully how amazing it is to watch this film because like just you can tell the amount of effort, energy, and love that was like fucking forced into it. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
And
like
it
there was
turned
this
out it
one
turned out
scene.
great.
there's this one scene where Sweet JP was fiddling his fingers on the wheel, right?
Hmm.
And if you watch it slowly, you'll realize that his fingers never return to the same position, which means that every frame is unique. Every keyframe is unique.
Wait a second, really? I think I missed that. Dude, I
Yeah,
need to watch this movie
it's like
again.
it's like two.
Hmm. You know what I found really impressive? The huge, they fucking threw this out of nowhere. The huge bioweapon. Okay,
Yeah,
so I'll explain to people who are listening potentially. So basically, they're in the middle of a race on this planet where they're not supposed to be racing because the people who control the planet, these robot type characters, are extremely authoritarian and they don't want news of their new weapons getting out. And one of these weapons ends up being disturbed by the race, and it's this giant ass
yes,
bioweapon. It's just giant ass creature, this yellowish creature of like slime that just like shoots fucking lasers everywhere. It was absolutely insane. And then directly after that scene, there was the scene where the guy transformed into the other huge, like enormous beast and then fought it for like a good like couple minutes. And
yeah,
I'm just sitting, I'm just sitting there, just going like, what the fuck is going on? In like the best possible way, you know? Like
yeah.
I'm totally confused. The plot makes absolutely no sense at this point because like, what's going on?
Well, I
But
feel like it.
I'm enjoying it.
I feel like it's a disservice to say the plot makes no sense because like the plot is in itself, like you said, really simple. It's
True.
just a guy that wants to win a race, and if that's the plot, they could add whatever they want. That's it's not plot at that point. It's just world.
To be fair, they never really tied up that loose end. So like for example, Funky Boy, which is the bioweapon, they never explained it how it got killed or if it got killed, and that other commander guy that turned into a gigantic monster to fight Funky Boy was never that like line was never fully patched up, and
Yeah.
I don't feel like there was any significance to that. They probably just didn't have the time. So
Well,
when
yeah,
I say incomplete plot, I mean things like that, right?
yeah. Just like plot elephants, where like they don't really cover all the that's tie up all the loose ends. And yeah, that's actually some of the major criticisms about the film. It's like, the ending is like it's abrupt, and then there's a lot of loose ends that are just like what happened next, like what's going on.
True.
But
It
that's
felt
I feel like that was never really the point of the movie.
yeah, kind of bizarre, honestly.
Yeah.
But like you said, that's not supposed to be the focus. Plot isn't the focus. What is the
Yeah,
focus of this is the
it
artisanship of the animation
the
and
artist and the
the
world. That's like literally it.
the artisan of the world
Like
sorry, the
the
artisan of the animation, and then the world building, which is something I
yeah,
wanted to actually get into. The world building
yeah, yeah,
in this movie is amazing, but not in the way that you would traditionally understand world building. A lot of times series like, for example, Star Wars, especially Tolkien, will straight up tell you what the world is about, right? They'll say this is the history, this is what's going on, this is what um, this world entails, right? But this film does something slightly different, which is, like you mentioned earlier, it's all about showing rather than telling. They give you
yeah,
subtle context clues that allow, in both dialogue and in the scenes, that allow you to extrapolate what's going on. And I found that really, really interesting.
yeah. Like because it's science fiction, it's a movie. It's not based on any novel. It's like it's original production, right? They could
Mm,
just give you like, hey, this is what's happening. This is why it's happening, and you just gotta accept it as is because you just already formed like you already suspended your disbelief, right? You're like
right.
you don't need the extra details because you know this is another world. This is how it's gonna be. That's just how it, right?
Yeah, yeah. You know what was something particularly interesting about Redline, actually? Now that you mentioned this, the fact that it's a sci-fi is actually really important to the whole world building dynamic. And I'll explain why. Now, because it's a sci-fi, right? A lot of the understandings of the characters and the world is based on how the different species interact with each other, right? because these are different species of life that come together from different varying backgrounds to this one central event, which is the racing event, right?
Yeah.
And this is unique in fantasy and sci-fi because you have this interaction of species, which means that a huge component of the world building, or the mental understanding of the world that the viewer builds, lies in character design. So
Yeah.
I'll give an example, right? So there was a character, I believe, that was kind of like a dog. Do you know which one I'm talking
Yeah.
about?
Right at the beginning. Yeah.
Yeah. So this dog-like character, like, he doesn't have any voice lines or anything, right? But by the build of his ship, by the way he's dressing, and by the fact that he's a dog, you can make basic assumptions about how his world is, and how and then you can start to draw ideas about how, like, they got to this point, how he has the technology to be in this event, like all of these
Yeah.
things that come together because of how exactly he's designed as a character. Sweet JP is another really great example, because it's like just this character design of this like 1950s-esque slick hair guy in a Mustang in an
No, not a
international
Mustang. Wrong.
not
It's a
okay,
Trans Am. Big difference. Trans Am. Much cooler.
sorry,
Mustangs are for sports car wanting.
okay, fair enough. So he's in a muscle car, right?
Yeah.
And you're given no explanation as to why. He just has this one 1970s-esque car that he's racing at like a billion miles an hour, and it causes
Well.
you to build the world around it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
honestly, it works like perfectly. Like the art style and then the concept of the show and then the animation just work really well together.
Yeah. But I find it more like it gives you insight on the characters themselves rather than their world, about their development as characters. For example,
Oh yeah.
Machine Head. For the viewers, Machine Head was one of one of the newer winners of the Redline, the previous, right?
Hmm.
And at one point they give you a quick biography of Machine. First time
Yeah.
seeing him, he resembled much more like a regular human being with a metal head, right? And each subsequent wins, you see him decked out in more like in buffer metal, like bigger metal pieces, and then he starts getting like a really big broad smile, right? His first time winning, he was crying and whatnot. The second time, he was just saluting the crowd, and then the third time winning, he wasn't even acknowledging the reporter,
Mm.
right?
So
That
it's
and then
so
yeah, and then he's giving the interview at the last spot, and he's like, I don't even see myself as a like on par with others. It's like I'm better than everyone else, and he's petting a fucking like doll,
mm,
a dog, right? And so like he went from the humble like guy that won the race by just pure skill and also like luck, to the guy
mm,
that's just, hey look, I like the cocky piece of shit, right?
right.
It's like
And that
they you
and
don't
it
need to know anything more about Machine Head, but just showing you that 30 seconds was like enough to give you a touch on his character.
it's interesting because that scene on the news where, well, the girl was like basically just watching the news naked at home, right? And they're explaining these other racers that are in the competition. It was a rare instance of telling rather than showing. I mean,
Yeah.
but to be fair, like you just mentioned, even within that segment where they're explicitly telling you things, a lot more context clues are hidden, which allow you to extrapolate further meanings about the subject, specifically in this case, Machine Head. You know what was another really great area for world building that I liked?
What?
The moon of Robo Planet.
Oh,
So
Europass?
yeah, so basically, again, to those who haven't watched the movie yet, there since the actual race on Robo Planet is illegal and they're not supposed to be actually on there, right? All the racers gather on Robo World's moon, which has been designated by Robo World to various refugees from other systems,
Yeah.
right? So the people from Robo World have no sovereignty there. They're not allowed to send it's demilitarized zone, so they're not allowed to send soldiers or whatever, and they can convene there, like however they want.
Yeah.
I found it particularly interesting because it was an example of that kind of cross culturalism between all the species, right? That were gathering together, and like just the way that they like, for example, when he went to go trade currency, right? So
Yeah.
he made a currency exchange with this like random weird alien, right?
Yeah.
Like that's interesting for world building perspective because it implies that there is an economy, right?
Yeah.
There's a galactic economy that is going on, and that these people lie at the fringes of it because there's another counter economy that you have to kind of trade currencies for, right?
Yeah.
And then like he talked about inflation and shit. Like he said like, oh, the number of cigarettes they have is not as much, but the price is going up and stuff.
Yeah.
Like all these little hints just gave this feeling of richness that you don't get very often in other, I don't know, shows. All these things like they feel super deep, but like watching through the movie, these are only like quick snapshots of characters and stuff. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
They never reveal the full story. They never do. And that's an interesting thing, power that storytellers have, that you have the power to decide where your story begins and where your story ends. And that's part of the whole notion of world building, right? To
Yeah.
figure out, to be able to give your audience a view of your world, and then you have to decide whether or not you want to give them the full view or you want to allow their imaginations to fill everything in. And
Yeah.
to be honest, allowing people to fill it in is actually like arguably a better strategy sometimes,
Yeah.
as this film showed. So, what were your thoughts on some of the themes or messages or philosophies that you could find in the movie,
I don't
if
be
you found
real.
any?
I don't really have any themes that came to mind or like philosophies or anything. I just thought it was
Mhm.
a really so, but
I
like
thought,
it seems that you have some thoughts about that.
yeah, there were two things that I noticed that I found interesting. Um, I've mentioned them partially here, um, and they're this. First of all, uh, the whole refugee crisis thing. So they
Yeah.
have this moon, right, where on one hand there's this robo world, right, that's has a military whatever and wants to, they don't want to let refugees on their planet, so they give them the moon, right?
Yeah.
And I found it interesting how they were discussing um, exactly like how they, well, they weren't explicitly discussing, but they were kind of alluding to the conditions that these people were living in by the way the currency was doing, and then like the scenes, the background scenes, etc. And
Yeah.
it seemed like a humanitarian crisis, kind of, so it was
Yeah.
interesting that it might have been some sort of commentary on our, maybe refugee crises in our world, but I'm not exactly sure. I will say though, how that there was a bigger theme that I thought was much more explicit in it, and it was the notion of sovereignty, national sovereignty. So one question that kept on coming into my mind while I was watching this, especially when they were having Redline on this planet, right, was what gives these people the right to do this, right? So they're doing this illegally, right? And they're doing this with basically the not condolence, but the acceptance of the entire galaxy, as can be told by the fact that this is the largest television program in the galaxy, right?
Yeah.
And yet they're doing it randomly on this planet they picked this, a planet that, I mean, it seems arbitrarily, and they're doing it for, I don't know what reason.
The race
And
itself isn't
they
illegal.
frame
It's just the fact
in
that
the
they put on a
movie,
world.
the people that are trying to prevent them from racing as the bad guys. They seem to be the authoritarians, the classic like, oh, this is these guys are the obvious antagonists. We should hate them, and yet what gives us a right to say that, considering that these people are literally coming onto their homeworld and destroying what they've built, you know?
Yeah.
That was one idea that came up, and I didn't know exactly how to resolve it, because on the one hand I enjoyed the race, right? And the spectacle of entertainment that entailed. At the other hand,
Yeah.
I I think I'm a firm believer in like, sovereignty and in the ability of the country to control its own borders. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Still an interesting thought. We could talk about the ending. We talked about it briefly, but we never really kind of went full force on it, because
Yeah.
in my mind the ending is the most controversial part of the film, right?
Yeah.
They you start off with this fucking absolutely banger of a scene. These guys are racing at like what seems to be a bajillion miles an hour, just speeding across this planet. The animation is on point. Everything's fucking going and going and going, and you're hyped, right?
Yeah.
And then that instant climax, right, suddenly recedes into the recession of backstory for a large part of the rest of the film, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there's this huge section of like almost half an hour where it's literally just preparing for the next race and explaining the motivations behind the characters. And then you've got the Redline, where a bunch of wacky shit happens, and then you're building up to the climax. You get to this like almost like arguably orgasmic like scene where everyone's going like super duper quickly, and then it all just kind of like sputters out. The
Yeah.
JP wins the race. It's like, all right, um, they didn't really do anything with it. You know what I mean?
I don't think they could have done anything with it.
What do you mean?
Once you're going at speeds like that and like hyping it up like that, there's nothing that interesting about winning the race. It's like it's about the journey, not the end. You know, it's like it's all this like excitement, and once you cross the line, it's like you cross the line. Congratulations, you win.
True.
Is the way I see it. It's the same thing with real life racing. It's like, it's exhilarating. They cross the line, they slow down, come to the car, they cheer.
Yeah, but there's always in a lot of real life racing, there's always that moment of the crowd goes fucking wild, right? There's a
Yeah,
surreal experience as you feel this deep warm feeling in your heart well up as the crowd responds to this huge massive accomplishment for this one individual who's risked everything and come out of the gauntlet unscathed, right?
yeah,
And
yeah.
you don't feel that at the end of this movie. It feels forced.
I will agree that the ending does feel devoid of life,
Yeah,
right? But like I said, like we talked about earlier, that really isn't the focus. But
true.
yeah, it is disappointing to see it like end like that. But
Hmm.
with considering the fact that it took a decade to make, and given that that wasn't their main focus, it's kind of like I could forgive them, you know?
Yeah. I mean, no, I'm not saying that it's unforgivable, because it's definitely like the rest of the movie makes up for it in spades. Like, it's a really good movie, but still, the ending was, to me, it was lacking. But you brought up the good point that it's about the journey and not the destination, and that might have been the point of that ending, right? Like, it's kind of unsatisfactory because it just makes you want to watch it again, you know,
But
to experience
like both,
the amazingness.
yeah, but like like it ties up the main dots. For example, Sweet JP's and Sonashi's relationship, right?
Right,
And then they're both of their desires to win, and then
right.
they're also their conflicts with the mafia world. It all ties up and ends neatly. It's anticlimactic, but the main points are solved. Except like you got the random plot loose ends, but the main things
Yeah,
are like they're all complete. So it
right.
in that in terms of checklists, it does everything you need, but it
Hmm.
still leaves much to be desired.
Hmm. Well, everyone, thank you for tuning in to this week's podcast. If you liked what you listened to and you want more, we have much more available on our YouTube channel. Please consider subscribing. If you'd like to contact us personally, you can talk to us on Instagram, Twitter, or email at any of the links below. Of course, for more great media discussion and analysis, because we had a pretty fucking good discussion this time, you can visit our website at www.thevaultpublication.com. That's www.thevaultpublication.com.